Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue with the tale of Zal and Rudabeh, as Zal is about to be tested by the king. The sages sat with Zal and questioned him to test his wisdom. One of them said, "There are 12 flourishing, splendid cypress trees, each of which has 30 branches." Another said, "There are 2 fine, swiftly galloping horses, one black as a sea of pitch, the other white as clear crystal. They struggle and strive, but neither can overtake the other." A third said, "This is a wonder. There is a group of riders who pass by the prince, and sometimes there are 30 of them when you look, and sometimes 29. One is not there, and then you count again, and there are 30. A fourth said, "You see a beautiful meadow filled with green plants and threaded with streams. A man comes there, holding a huge scythe, and he cuts down the plants, whether they are fresh or dry, never swerving aside as he does so." Another said, "There are 2 cypresses rising from the ocean, and a bird has built nests there. He sits on one at night, and on the other during the day. When he flies up from the one, it leaves wither and dry, and when he sits on the other, it exhales the scent of musk. One is always withered, the other is always fresh and fragrant." Another said, "In the mountains I discovered a flourishing city, but people left it, preferring a thorny waste where they built houses towering up to the moon. They forgot the flourishing city and never minded it. Then an earthquake came, and their houses disappeared, and they longed for the city they had left. Now, explain these sayings to us if you can do so, and you will be turning dust to musk." Zal sat deeply in thought for a while. Then he threw back his shoulders and breathed deeply and answered the priest's questions, saying, "First, the 12 tall trees, each of which has 30 branches, are the 12 months of the year. 12 times the moon is renewed in her place, like a new king seated on his throne, and each month has 30 days. This is how time passes. As for the 2 horses who gallop swiftly as fire, the white and the black, striving to overtake one another, they are night and day, which pass over us across the heavens. Third, the 30 horsemen you spoke of, and who pass before the prince of whom one is lacking, and then when one counts there are 30 against these signify the fact that in some months 1 night is sometimes lacking. Now I shall unsheath the sword of my speech and explain the 2 trees on which the birds built its nest. From the sign of Aries to that of Libra, the world lies in darkness until it passes into the sign of Pisces. And the 2 cypresses are the 2 halves of the heavens, of which 1 half is always withered and one fresh. The bird is the sun, which keeps the world in hope and fear. The city in the mountains is the eternal world, and the thorny waste is the fleeting world, which gives us now caresses and riches, and now pain and suffering. God counts your breaths and prolongs or breaks off your days. A wind arises, and the earth shakes, and the world is filled with cries and lamentations. The man with a sharp scythe, who cuts down both the fresh and the withered plants, and who listens to no entreaties, is Time, the reaper, and we are like the plants who are cut down, father and grandchild alike, since he looks at neither young nor old, but cuts down all in his path. This is the way of the world, and no man is born from his mother but to die." When Zal finished his explanation, everyone there was astonished at his understanding. Manuchair's heart was pleased. He enthusiastically applauded him and gave orders that a banquet as splendid as the full moon be held. They drank until the world grew dark, and their wits were befuddled. The courtiers' cries resounded about the court, and when they left, they did so happy and drunk, grasping one another's arms. When the sun's rays appeared above the mountains and men woke from sleep, Zal came before the king like a ravening lion and asked permission to leave the court and rejoin his father. He said to the king, "I long to see Sam's face again. Now that I have kissed the foot of your ivory throne, and my heart has been gladdened by the sight of your crown and splendor. The king said to him, "Young hero, you must grant us one more day. It's love for Mehrub's daughter that makes you so eager to be off. What's this talk about missing Sam and Kabul?" Then he gave orders that cymbals, Indian bells, and trumpets be sounded in the great square. Warriors gathered cheerfully there, bringing spears, maces, arrows, and bows. There was a huge tree that had flourished for many months and years in the square. Zal grasped his bow and urged his horse forward. He shot an arrow at the tree, and the royal shaft pierced the great trunk. Then men bearing javelins set shields down. Zal asked his squire for a shield, squared his shoulders, and again urged his horse forward. He flung his bow aside and grasped a javelin, which he hurled at 3 stacked shields with such force that it passed straight through them. The king turned to his noble warriors and said, "Which of you will fight him in single combat? One of you should challenge him." The warriors donned their armor, and their hearts were angry despite the cheerful remarks they made. They twitched their horses' reins and rode into the square, grasping spears and shiny lances. Zal charged forward, the dust rising from his horse's hoofs, watching for each proud warrior would oppose him. Like a monster, he galloped out of the dust, bearing down on a warrior and grasping him by the belt. He snatched him from the saddle with such ease that the king and his army stared in wonder. The assembly cried out that no one had ever seen his equal, and that the mother of any warrior who opposed him on the battlefield would sure to be wear the dark colors of mourning. No lion had ever given birth to such a hero. Indeed, he should not be considered a mere hero, but a monster of war. And they said how fortunate Sam was that he would leave such a brave horseman in the world as his heir when he died. The king congratulated him, as did the courtiers, and the company returned to the palace. There Manucher prepared such gifts for Zal that they astonished the noblemen present. There were valuable crowns and golden thrones, armbands, torques, and golden bells, as well as splendid sets of clothes, slaves, horses, and many, many other things. Manucher dictated an answer to Sam's letter. "Brave warrior, victorious as a lion in all your vengeance, the heavens have not seen your like in battles and banquets and policy and beauty. Your fine son has come to me, and I have learned of his wishes and the nature of his desire. I have granted all he has asked, and spent many happy days in his company. A lion like you, who has leopards as his prey, what else would be he, sire, but a warlike lion cub? I send him back to you with a happy heart, and may evil keep its distance from him." Zal left the court and dispatched an envoy to Sam with this message. "I am returning from the king. My heart is happy, and I come with royal gifts, crowns, armbands, torques, and ivory thrones." Sam was so overjoyed to receive the message that, despite his age, his youth seemed to return to him. He dispatched an envoy to Kabul, telling Mehrub of Manucher's kind treatment of Zal, of the happiness that prevailed between them, and saying that both he and Zal would visit him as soon as Zal returned. The envoy galloped to Kabul, and shouts of joy rose into the sky when he gave his news. The king of Kabul was beside himself with pleasure that he was to be related to the ruler of Zabulistan. Musicians and entertainers were summoned. Mehrub's heart was cleared of all anxiety, and there was a perpetual smile on his lips. He called Sindak to him and spoke kindly to her, saying, "You are a splendid wife, and your advice has brought us from darkness to light. You have planted such a sapling on the earth that princes pay homage to it. What you planned for it has happened, and all my wealth is at your disposal, be it thrones or crowns or treasures." When Sindak heard this, she went to her daughter to tell her the news and said, "Good news! You will soon see Zal. You have gained a husband who is worthy of you. A wife and husband with your nobility of spirit will not endure the world's reproaches. You rushed to fulfill your heart's desire, and now you have found everything you sought." Rudabeh replied, "You are the king's consort, and worthy of praise from everyone. To dust beneath your feet is my pillow, and your commands are my soul's comforts. May the eye of Ahriman be far from you, and your heart and soul always be filled with joy." Sindak heard her, and then she set about preparing the palace for their visitors. She had the audience hall decorated like a paradise, and rosewater, wine, musk, and ambergris were placed there. She laid down a carpet worked in gold and sewn with emeralds, and another whose design was made of pearls, each of which shone like a drop of water. Then she placed a golden throne there, with Chinese patterns on it, studded with jewels that framed carved reliefs, and its feet were made of rubies. Next, she turned her attention to Rudabeh, adorning her like a paradise, and writing magical incantations to the sun to protect her. She confined her to the golden apartments and gave no one access to her. All of Kabul was made beautiful with colors, fine fragrances, and precious objects. Wine was brought, and the elephants' backs were draped with roomy brocades, on which musicians sat, wearing golden diadems. The welcoming party was put together. The slaves went ahead, scattering musk and ambergris, and spreading silk and samite in the way. Musk and golden coins were scattered on the procession, and the ground was wet with rosewater and wine. Meanwhile, Zal made all speed homeward like a flying eagle on its skiff skimming the water. No one was aware of his approach, and so no one went out to meet him. And suddenly a cry went up from the palace that Zal had arrived. Sam went happily out to greet him, and he clasped him in his arms, holding him close for a long time. When Zal had freed himself from his father's embrace, he kissed the ground, and then recounted all he had seen and heard. Sam and Zal sat on thrones beside one another, and their lips were all smiles as they talked of Sindak's visit to Sam. Sam said, "A message came from Kabul, and the envoy was a woman called Sindak, who wanted a promise from me that I would not act badly to her, and I gave her this, and then she asked for everything too charmingly that I granted all of it. First, she wanted Zelestran's prince to marry the princess of Kabul, then that you and I visit her as guests, as recompense for the distress she had been through. Now a messenger has come from her saying that this business of her daughter has been settled now. What should we tell this messenger? What answer should we send Mehrub?" Zal was so happy that he blushed like a tulip from head to foot, and he answered, "If you think it suitable, send a detachment of troops, and we'll come after them. We can visit them because we have a lot to discuss together." Sam looked at Zal, as he understood very well what his son wanted. He knew that Zal could not sleep at night, and had no interest in any conversation that had to do with Mehrub, except for his daughter. Sam gave orders that bells and Indian chimes signal their departure. The royal pavilion was struck, and messengers were sent on ahead to announce that Sam, Zal, and a detachment of warriors and elephants would soon arrive. Mehrub had the drums sounded and the trumpets blown, and drew up his armies so that it glittered like a rooster's eye. The elephants and musicians and the various banners of red, white, yellow, and purple silk made the earth seem like a paradise. With the blare of trumpets and the sound of harps, the squeals of bugles and the ringing of bells, it seemed as if Judgment Day had come. This was the manner in which Mehrub went forward to welcome Sam, and when he saw him, he dismounted from his horse and walked forward. Sam embraced him and asked him how fate had dealt with him. Mehrub, for his part, called down blessings on both Sam and Zal, and then mounted his swift charger again, like the new moon rising above the mountains. He placed a golden crown studded with jewels on Zal's head, and the group arrived in Kabul happily, laughing and chatting together. The town was so full of sounds of Indian chimes, lutes, harps, and trumpets that it seemed to be transformed. The horses' manes were soaked in musk, wine, and saffron, and drummers and trumpeters were mounted on elephants. 300 slaves carrying golden goblets filled with musk and jewels called down blessings on Sam, and then scattered their goblets' jewels before him, and whoever came to the festivities wanted for nothing. Sam smiled and said to Simorgh, "How long are you going to keep Rudabeh hidden?" In the same manner, Simorgh replied, "And where is the gift we'll give if you wish to see the sun?" Sam answered, "Ask me whatever you wish." They went on to the golden apartments in which the happiness of spring awaited them. There Sam looked at Rudabeh and was overcome with wonder. He did not know how to praise her adequately, or how to keep his eyes from being dazzled at her splendor. Then he commanded Mehrub to come forward, and the marriage was solemnized according to ancient custom. Zal and Rudabeh both sat side by side on one throne, and agates and emeralds were scattered over them. Rudabeh wore a splendid diadem, and Zal a jewel-studded crown. A list of the treasures he was given them was brought by Mehrub, and as it was read out, it seemed men's ears could not listen till its end. From there they went to a banqueting hall, where they sat with wine-cups in their hands for a week, and then returned to the palace, where the festivities went on for 3 more weeks. At the beginning of the following month, Sam began his journey home to Sistan, together with Zal, their elephants and drums, and the troops who had accompanied them. Zal had howdahs and litters made for Mehrub's womenfolk, and a palanquin for Rudabeh, and she and Simorgh, Mehrub, and their family set out for Sistan. They traveled happily, praising God for his gifts, and arrived in high spirits, laughing and smiling. Then Sam bestowed sovereignty over Sistan on Zal, and unfurled his auspicious banner to lead his troops once again to the land of Gorkson and Bastria. It was not long before Rudabeh's cypress slim began to change. Her belly filled out, her body grew heavy, and the Judas blossoms of her face turned as sallow as saffron. Her mother said to her, "My soul, what's happened that you look so yellow?" She replied, "My lips moan day and night. My time has come, and I cannot give birth to the burden within me. My skin feels as though it were stuffed with stones, or that it contained a mass of iron." Rudabeh endured this until the time for her to give birth came closer, and she could neither sleep nor rest. Then one day she fainted, and a cry went up from Zal's palace. Simorgh was informed, and she clawed at her face and tore out her musky hair. The news reached Zal that the leaves of his noble cypress tree had withered away, and he came to her pillow sick at heart, with tears in his eyes. Then he remembered Simorgh's feather and smiled, and he told Simorgh to take heart. He brought a brazier and lit a fire, in which he burned a little of Simorgh's feather. Immediately the air darkened, and the bird approached, ready to do his bidding, like pearls raining down from a dark cloud. I say pearls, but it was peace to the soul that she brought. Zal made his obeisance before the bird and praised her, and the Simorgh said to him, "Why are you sad? Why are the lion's eyes wet with tears? A cub eager for fame will be born to you from this silver cypress. He'll master all the beasts of earth and air. He'll terrify the dragon in its lair. When such a voice rings out, the leopard gnaws in anguished terror its unyielding claws. Wild on the battlefield that voice will make the hardened hearts of iron warriors quake. Of cypress stature and of mammoth might, live miles will barely be javelin's flight. For him to be born into the world, you must bring a glittering knife and a man familiar with spells. First make the beautiful Rudabeh drunk with wine, and so drive fear and worry from her heart. Don't watch as the sorcerer begins his incantations to bring out this lion from within her body. He will clip open the cypress belly, and she will feel no pain. Then, driving all fear and anxiety from your heart, you must sew up the wound where the sorcerer cut her. Pound the herb I will describe to you in milk and musk, and dry the mixture in the shade. Massage this into her wound, and you will see it heal within the day. After this, stroke her body with my feather, since its shadow will be auspicious. You should rejoice at this, and give thanks to God. It was he who gave you this royal tree, which every day brings you greater good fortune. Do not be sad at this turn of events. Your noble sapling is about to bear fruit." She plucked a feather from her wing and let it fall, then flew upwards and was gone. Zal retrieved the feather and did as Simorgh had told him. This was a wonder, and the world watched, weeping and apprehensive. Sindak cried desperate tears, wondering when the baby would be delivered from her daughter's body. A skilled priest came and made the lovely Rudabeh drunk with wine. She felt no pain as he cut open her side and turned the baby's head toward the opening. He brought the child forth so painlessly that no one in the world has ever seen such a wonder. The child was like a lion, a noble son, tall and handsome, lovely to look upon, and all who saw this mammoth baby gazed in wonder at him, murmuring and amazed. For a day and a night the mother slept from the effects of the wine, and her heart knew nothing of what happened. They sewed up her wound and massaged the scar with the mixture that Simorgh had described. When she woke from her sleep and spoke to Sindak, the onlookers gave thanks to God and showered her with jewels and gold coins. She smiled when she saw her noble child, because she saw the signs of royal glory in him, and said, "I escaped from my peril. My pain came to an end." And so they named the boy Rostam. They sewed a doll of silk that was the same height as this lion, who had not yet tasted milk, and stuffed it with sable fur. Its face shone like the sun and the evening star. They traced a dragon on its bicep, placed a lion's paw in its hand, tucked a lance beneath its arm, and put a mace in one hand and reins in the other. Then they sat it on a charger surrounded by servants, scattered gold coins over the group, and sent this image of Rostam with its mace to Sam. Festivities were held in Celestium to Kabul. All plains were filled with the sound of trumpets and drinking of wine, and there was a banquet for 100 guests in every corner of the kingdom. Musicians were everywhere in Zal, and commoners and noblemen sat together as intimately as the warp and weft of one cloth. They took the image of the unweaned Rostam to Sam, whose hair prickled with pleasure. "This silken doll resembles me, and if his body is half this size, his head will be touching the clouds." Then he called for the messenger to come forward, and showered gold coins over him till they covered his head. The joyful din of drums rang out from the court, and the royal square glittered like a rooster's eye. Sam called for wine and musicians, distributed gold coins to the poor, and held such a banquet that the sun and the moon gazed down in wonder. He answered Zal's letter, beginning with praise of the Creator and the good fortune that had come to them. Next he praised Zal, the lord of the sword and mace, and then turned to the silken doll, who displayed the shoulders of a warrior and the glory of a king. He told Zal that he should preserve it so carefully that no breath of wind could harm it, and added that he had prayed night and day that he would live long enough to see a hero grow from Zal's seed. And now that this child had been born to them, their chief duty was to pray for his life. So the world went forward, and things had been hidden were revealed. 10 wet nurses set to suckle Rostam, since it is milk that gives man his strength. When he was weaned, his food was oak apples and meat. He ate enough for 5 grown men, and people were admonished, absolutely astonished at his appetite. When he was 8 spans high, he seemed like a noble cypress tree, and his face shone like a star, at which the world stared in wonder. He seemed to be Sam himself in his stature, appearance, opinions, and behavior. When news reached brave Sam that Zal's son had grown to be like a lion, and that no one in the world had ever seen such a young man with his warrior-like qualities, Sam's heart beat faster, and he longed to see the boy. He entrusted his army to a commander and went with a detachment of experienced fighters towards Zal, led there for the love of Zal's son. When Zal heard of his father's approach, he had drums stretched on elephants, and earth turned the color of ebony beneath the cavalry's hoofs. He and Mehrub and the governor of Kabul set out as a welcoming party. A pebble was thrown into a goblet, which was the signal for the soldiers to mount, and a great cry went up on all sides. All the valley was filled with troops. The earth turned as black as pitch, and the air was dark and dusk. The neighing of Arab horses and the trumpeting of elephants could be heard for 5 miles. One elephant bore a golden throne on which sat Zal's son, and his cypress statue and huge shoulders and chest. On his head was a crown. He wore a belt about his waist and carried a shield in front of his body and a heavy mace in his hand. When Sam appeared in the distance, the army divided into 2 columns, and Zal and Mehrub, the youth and the warrior of many years, dismounted and bowed their heads to the ground, calling down blessings on the hero Sam. As Sam caught sight of the lion cub on the elephant's back, his face opened like a blossom. They led the boy forward on this elephant, and Sam stared at him, taking in his crown and throne. Brave Sam called down blessings on him, saying, "My lion cub, incomparable child, may you live long and happily." Rostam kissed the throne, and what was wonderful praised his grandfather in a new way. "Live happily, my lord, the sturdy root from which I, Rostam, am the newest shoot. I am Sam's devoted slave, and while I live, the pleasures feasting, sleep, and comfort give will not beguile me. Helmets, armors, bows that I can draw against our company's foes, my saddle and my horse, my mace and sword, these will be all my life, my noble lord. My face resembles yours, and when I fight, may I resemble you in dauntless might. And then he climbed down from the elephant's back, and Sam took him by the hand, kissing his eyes and head, and the elephants and drums stayed still and silent. They set off for Rudabeh, smiling and chatting as they rode, and when they arrived they sat in the palace on a golden dais, feasting in happiness. They spent a month in this manner, untroubled by hardships, and music accompanied their feasting, with each of them singing in turn. In one corner of the dais sat Zal, in the opposite corner Rostam, with his mace in his hand, and between them was Sam, with the feathers from the lammergeier signifying royal glory, depending from his crown. He stared and awed Rostam. From time to time he would call down blessings on the youth's arms and shoulders, his reed-like waist and noble chest. Then he turned to Zal and said, "You could question 100 generations and never hear one who was born in such a manner. There's no one in the world who is as handsome as he is, or who has his stature and shoulders. Come, let us drink wine in celebration of this happiness, and may it drive all sorrow from our hearts. Since the world is fleeting, we arrive and depart, and as one grows old, another is born." They drank their wine, and in their cups they praised Zal after Rostam. But Mehrub was dazed with drink, and in his drunkenness he said, "The arrogant ideas that filled his head. I don't consider Zal as anything," he said, "and Sam's as worthless as the king. Rostam and me, we are the heroes here. The clouds daren't pass above us out of fear. And I'll renew Zahok's power, you'll soon see, and all of you will have to bow to me." But Zal and Sam laughed at Mehrub's boastful words. At the beginning of the month, Sam set off once more. He said to Zal, "My son, see that you act justly, with your heart ready to serve your kings, choosing wisdom over wealth, always keeping your hands from evil deeds and striving to do God's will. Know that the world tarries for no man. Take care of what I say, follow my advice, and tread only in the path of righteousness. I feel in my heart that my time is here coming to an end." Then he said farewell to his son and grandson, admonishing them not to forget his words. Chimes sounded from the court, and the blare of trumpets was heard from the elephant's back. Sam left for Bastria. His heart was filled with love, and he spoke kindly to his son and grandson, whose faces were stained with tears, and whose hearts were filled with his precepts as they accompanied him for 3 stages of the way. Then they turned back, and Sam continued on his long journey. And so now I've finished my tale for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more, much more. I'll see you then.